God, as we have gathered in this blessed place to worship you, cause us to understand the importance of this day and of every worship opportunity before your throne. Cause me to decrease that you might increase within me, and in so doing I am now hidden behind your cross, that your people may see more of thee and less of me. In your holy name I pray. Amen. The passage read in your hearing this morning was from Mark, and I want you to turn there, if you will, Mark chapter 8. I'm just going to read one verse. The part of the pericope was read for you, but just one verse from me. And then I'm going to stop and invite you to watch a brief video that represents what we are dealing with and discussing this morning. Mark chapter 8, as I said, verse 34 reads this way in the New King James Version. When he had called the people to himself with his disciples also, he said to them, whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Verse 35, I'll add. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel will save it. For the next few moments this morning, I want to talk from the theme, the burden of hope. And this is part 2. Yesterday was the celebration of Bloody Sunday, the 50th anniversary of the famous crossing of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And I want us to reflect on that in light of this sermon. And so please look up at the board for the brief video.
There was an individual by the name of Jimmy Lee Jackson, who was a part of the night march in Marion, Alabama, which is not far from Selma. His grandfather, KJ Lee, and his mother were a part of the demonstration. There was a police riot, and the state troopers started to beat people, and they chased a bunch of folks into a local cafe, and state troopers assaulted Jimmy Lee Jackson's mother. He came to her aid, and they shot him, and eventually he stumbles out of the cafe and dies. And James Bevel, who's working with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference at SCLC, recommends that they take the body of Jimmy Lee Jackson and walk it up Highway 80 and place it at the steps of the state capitol as a protest against the policies of Alabama, but also of Governor Wallace. That idea morphs into what becomes the Selma to Montgomery March.
We were determined that we were going to march from Selma to Montgomery. We left Brown Chapel Church here and went down to the Edmund Pettus Bridge with the expectation of marching across that bridge on the way to Montgomery.
Here we are in Selma, Alabama. They are praying before they march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. There's John Lewis, later a congressman, Hosea Williams. There's Andrew Young, former UN ambassador. There's the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and they're marching across. Here we are, what's waiting on the other side of the bridge. Alabama state troopers. That Confederate flag on the front of that trooper car isn't there by happenstance.
The person with a bullhorn said he had orders from the governor not to allow that march to continue. We were asked if this bridge go back to our homes or back to the church. And if not, we would actually be moved. And we had decided we were not going to turn unless we were turned.
Troopers knew there was going to be some trouble, so they put the gas mask on. They stop and they face the troopers. As the head of the state troopers, Major John Cloud, tells them to disperse, well, they don't disperse. And when they don't disperse, the troopers go wild.
So we gave orders for the state troops to move in on with their billy clubs clutched on both ends. And literally went down the line of marches, toppling us over. I saw blood flowing. Pandemonium broke out in the crowd, a state of disbelief that this was happening in these United States of America.
Here's John Lewis being brutally assaulted by the Alabama State Troopers, as are all the other people who were there peacefully protesting for the right to vote.
The marchers are assaulted by an array of law enforcement officers, and that is beamed across the nation, across the world, as the forces in Alabama try to turn back the idea that black people wanted to participate in the political process.
Getting back to that church from whence we had come, I looked into the face of those persons who were able to get back to Brown Chapel Church. Some were beaten on the highway across the bridge. And as I looked into their faces, I saw again a determination that we were ready to really give whatever it took in order to get that right to vote, to participate, to determine the destiny of our lives.
It's easy for us, those of you sitting before me who never experienced racism, sexism, classism, or any of the other isms to the extent that our forebears have. It's easy for us to act as though it is yesterday. We don't live like that anymore. We can go where we want and do what we want to do. That, brothers and sisters, is probably the biggest lie of all. For the things of yesterday are just undercover and more subtle today. You would say, never in America, it couldn't happen here. You know, that's back then. That haven't we already arrived? Life is better for us. After all, we have an African American in the pulpit. Truly African American. How is it that you would look back at that 50 years ago and pull it into the present as though there was some immediacy to it? Reality is that we live in a world now where there are a lot of things in this 21st century I would not have expected to have dealt with. I would not have expected that the Industrial Revolution would be replaced by jail cells. I would not have expected that when police dogs were called in one city into service to protect the citizenry, it would only attack just one group of the citizens. I would not have expected that a person would get a $50 ticket and end up paying $500 of fines and still owe the city money because the city is using its poor to fund its programs. I would not have expected that a man could be on the corner selling loose cigarettes and be choked out by a police officer. I would not have expected that a little child wielding a plastic gun in 2 seconds of confronting an officer would be dead on the streets, and then his sister, who is crying there, is restrained and treated like a dog. I would not have expected that in this country of ours that voting rights would be the new crisis that's the same as the old. How is it that the president of the United States, who's sitting beside a former president, would have to stand and declare and ask on the celebration of the 50th time of Bloody Sunday, how is that he's still asking for that which that was supposedly already given the Voters' Rights Act? That which we thought was over has found a new beginning. And each of us can sit here in worship and act as though the world is perfect, because my little corner of it is better. The world is perfect because I live in a new home. The world is perfect because I have nice clothes to wear, or my life is much better. But understand this, brothers and sisters, unless all of us are free, none of us are free. unless all of us have affordable health care, unless all of us have good mental health care, unless all of us have access to this world, none of us have it. And each of us has a responsibility to the next one to bear one another's burdens. That's what Galatians says. Galatians uses that in reference to moral failure. It uses that in reference to my care of my brother and sister, that I have this responsibility. The responsibility of caring, the responsibility of looking beyond myself. And understand this, this is not a black and white issue. This is a human issue. One of the things that causes me greatness in my spirit and happiness, elation, is the fact that the movement that took them from Selma to Montgomery, albeit started by the death of a young black man, ended up with many people from across the country coming to aid. There were people of all races, of all creeds, who realized that the burden of hope rested upon them. Realize that if I don't do anything, it will not be done. Jimmy Lee Jackson's death was like the widow's mite in the Bible. You may not have known him before, but you will never forget his name. You'll never forget his heroic deed. You'll never forget his death. You know, there's something to be said of this time here. There's something to be said as we re-examine those persons like James Reeb, who would come down from Boston, who would be in the city to help protest and then be beaten down by a mob and killed. There's something to be said by the Viola Liusos of the world, who would be driving marches and killed. There's something to be said of the senior saints who would march in their last and be killed, be beaten and bruised and battered and scorned. There's something to be said on their behalf. And what I need to tell you is, you too bear the burden of hope. I love the passage of scripture read in your hearing this morning, because here Jesus is, he's talking to his disciples. He's sharing with them about life and about what is to take place. And the moment he turns his attention to the scandal of suffering, the moment he turns his attention to the horror that would be Calvary and the cross, the moment he turns his attention to the difficulties of life and the hard pathway that he would have to tread, the moment he turns his attention to the vicissitudes of life and the pain and burdens of other people, all of a sudden, then Peter speaks up and says, Lord, don't tell people that suffering is necessary. Take suffering out the equation. Take hard trials out the equation. Don't put that in the story. You will turn people off from being a part of this movement. Please, God, take that away. Don't do that. And he looks at him and says, get behind me, Satan. He uses those words. The New King James has this new phraseology that is almost Near Eastern. It says, you are not mindful of the things of God. I love mindfulness, because mindfulness relates to the fact that I have actually vested myself and my interest in a particular thought or thing. It is not a casual observance. I am now engrossed in it. And he says, what you have allowed to occupy your mind are the things of the flesh. Jeez, that's kind of rough, Lord. I gave up everything to follow you. I'm with you. No, Peter, you gave up everything because you thought we were going into the kingdom. So you were really going after the BBD, the bigger, better deal. And since you thought there was a kingdom at the end, there was a crown at the end, you were going for that. But now that I've told you that it's not going to be easy and that my kingdom is not of this world, now all of a sudden you want to hutch me. Because what you really wanted was an easier road. In the midst of all of this, I thought we could make this both corporate and personal. And there are 4 things that arrest my attention this morning as a part of this word, the burden of hope, because I believe there are 4 requirements that have to be met in order to have such hope, in order to bear such hope. The first of which is the burden of hope requires a bodacious desire. A bodacious desire. What do you mean, Reverend? Well, he says, if anyone desires to come after me, that's rather bold, it's rather bodacious to get to the place where you think you can follow Jesus. That's rather bold to get to the place, someone who says that I can be better than Michael Jordan. That's a bodacious desire. You now think you're better than the best that ever lived. You're better than Muhammad Ali. That's a bodacious desire. What you have to realize is that having that bodacious desire says, I believe I can do more than what I've done before. I'll let nothing hold me back from doing it. I have this belief, this faith, this trust from God that there's something great in me. Greater is he that's in me than he that is in the world. I believe I can think bold thoughts. I believe I can see a future that I don't see right now at my grasp, but I know it's coming. I believe that tomorrow will be better than today. I believe that I can assert my godhood in the God I serve and trust God to go beyond even my parents and forebearers. I believe in a bodacious desire. Some of you worry about the flesh. Peter, you're mindful of the flesh. You worry about what people are going to say about you if you say that. You worry about what people are going to say about you if you say, I'm going to graduate from college when you haven't hardly finished high school. You worry what people are going to say about you when you tell them, I'm going to go and I'm going to work for a Fortune 500 company when you just barely got 500 cents. But you have to know. I'm fond of studying figures and people and reading biographies, and I don't think anybody has intrigued me more than Walt Disney. And the reason for that has to be the fact that he was bodacious. He was bold. He didn't care what you thought, or what you thought. He had a vision in his mind. Matter of fact, he was such that he would come into a meeting and he would offer up his plan. And if nobody laughed, he would think that the plan wasn't big enough. You need to dream so big that someone has to laugh at your dream. It was a bodacious thought to believe that the children of sharecroppers, the children who had just come out from slavery, the children who were living in a Jim Crow South, the children who had to worry about the Ku Klux Klan, the children who had to worry about night riders, those children would be as courageous enough to speak up and say, we want the vote. Poll tax, we want the vote. Count the number of jelly beans, we want the vote. How many representatives, we want the vote. In the midst of it all, they believed that they could receive equality of an American dream. I know some of you say to yourself, I don't need the vote, I got the vote. Well, you don't use it, so what difference make? What is really crazy, Ferguson, people were upset about how bad it was and how rough the prosecutor was and how he didn't care for them. What really is crazy is the fact that the prosecutor is an elected official and the city is more than 60% African American. So how do you let somebody in the position that doesn't like you? I'm not saying he had to be African American, just get somebody to like you. Let me help you. Let me work. At some point, you ought to be bold enough to dream impossible dreams and believe God for the result. Jesus said, if you have this bodacious desire, he said, but number two, he said, in order to handle the burden of hope, it requires a bonded discipline. A bonded discipline. I need to know. I need to get it in my spirit that I have to be disciplined. I have to tell you, he says, anyone come after me, let him deny himself. That's rather interesting, to deny oneself. If one were to think closely about it, some people get into denial of self as a way of practicing religious faith, religious belief. The more of self-denial I have, the holier I am. That kind of doctrine that a person can attain some high spiritual or moral state by practicing self-denial. That's not what Jesus meant. He didn't mean that you were better than someone else because you didn't have on good shoes. That's not what he meant. He didn't mean you were more holy if your shirt was holy. That's not what he meant. No, he did not mean that. What he meant was that if one wants to follow God, one has to be willing to give something up in order to do it. One has to be willing to say, I will deny myself that joy. I will deny myself that fun. I will deny myself. Well, let me put it in a vernacular that you might understand. If you really want to be successful, you may have to deny yourself a Friday night party. You may have deny yourself a rave experience. Deny yourself Molly. Deny yourself. Oh, you don't get me. If you really want to be successful, you may have to deny the television and go to the library. If you really want to be successful, you may have to put in the work in order to get the results. Deny your flesh. Here he is. He says to them, he says, you got to know, you have to know that if you want to follow Jesus, it's going to cost you something. It's going to cost you something. It's not going to be a free ride. It's going to cost you something. My baby boy came home from school, and my wife and I, we were glad to see him, of course, got off the train and come up here, and we were so excited. So I know the life of a college student is not one of riches and wealth. So I realized the moment he got off the train, he was going to come, amen. He was going to do me like I used to do my father. Anybody know my favorite hymn? In case you don't. Father, I stretch my hand to thee. No other help I know. If thou withdraw thyself from me, oh, whither shall I go? Before he could get to singing, my wife and I said to him, there's some snow out there. There's some ice out there. Now, if you go and deny yourself the pleasure of being with your friends and get the snowing and the icing, then we will bless you. Are you listening to me? Because, see, everybody wants the results, but they don't want to put in the work. I'm just trying. That boy went out there. I've never seen him work quite that hard. I don't know if college has just made him more industrious and disciplined, or if his desire for resources was just that great. But he exceeded our expectations for what he would do, so we exceeded his expectations for the return on investment. You cannot beat God giving. The more you give up, the more God will give to you. The third thing. The burden of hope requires bodily daily devotion. Bodily daily devotion. This is important to me because he says, not only do I have to deny myself, but I have to take up my cross. And Luke 9:23, which is the same verse in a different gospel, he says to us that we need to take up the cross daily. Now I got to help you here. If you don't want to get you involved in the answer to the prayers that you pray, then you have already denied yourself having prayers answered on your behalf. Let me, I'll do it another way. There was a thing where this fellow talked about hell, and in hell the person woke up and was around a table, and everybody around the table was starving. This is hell. In the middle of the table was a banquet, but everybody around the table was starving. The middle of the table had fresh fruits and vegetables, but everybody around the table was starving. What had happened was they had put forks there that were too long to put them in your mouth. And they could only eat with the fork. And they couldn't get, so they could see what they wanted, but they couldn't get it. The next room was heaven. Everybody was looking good, eating well, and having a good time, but they had the same forks. So how is it that they're starving over in hell but eating over in heaven? You know why? Because in heaven they fed each other. You have to know that a part of denying yourself gets you to the place where your body has to be involved in your daily devotion, but not only for your sake, but for the sake of others around you. Take up the cross daily. Daily! Follow me. You know, some of you, some of us remember Dr. King didn't live to see this day. He didn't live to see an African-American president. He would not have lived, preferably, to see a first female president. He would not have lived to that. He didn't have all that during his time, but we have. We have. And somebody will say, why should I work on behalf of people I don't know? And do for people I can't even see, don't even know when they're coming along. Howard Thurman tells the story of a man who was planting a tree. And he's planting that apple tree. And as he's planting the tree, someone came along and said to him, Mister, why are you planting a tree that you will never benefit from? You'll never get its shade. You'll never eat its fruit. You'll never be able to enjoy it. And his response was, all of my life, I've eaten fruit from trees I did not plant. At some point, it's my responsibility to bring myself to the table and the altar of sacrifice and do something beyond me for somebody else. I close. The burden of hope requires a belief in divine destiny. A belief in divine destiny. This is important to me. You see, if you believe that God has a plan for your life, if you believe that God is in control, if you believe your life has purpose and meaning, then all of a sudden you get energy that other folk don't understand. Look at somebody now, say, neighbor, destiny is upon your life. Let no one pronounce the failure of your life until you check with God. God has a plan. God has a plan. God has a plan. God has a blessing with my name on it. King could stand there and say, look, I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I can predict that we as a people are going to get there. I want to tell you something. We have not seen all that God's going to do, but our latter days will be greater than our past. My latter days are going to be greater than my past. The next thing God does for me will supersede everything that he's already done. It's my due season. It's my time to be blessed. And I bear the burden of hope, not just simply for me, but for everyone that loves the Lord. This is our season of hope. Somebody give God a praise. Somebody give God a praise. Somebody give God a praise. Give God a praise. I bear it gladly. Must Jesus bear the cross alone and all the world go free? No, there's a cross for everyone, and there's a cross for me. This consecrated cross I bear till Christ shall set me free. I've got to do my part because God has done his part. I leave you with this. Look at someone now. Say, neighbor, you're already standing on the shoulders of giants. Make them proud. I extend you an invitation. The doors of the church are open. If you're not already standing, join us this morning. I extend you an invitation. We greet you.